Welcome to the Sendcast. My name is Dale Pickles and I'm the host of the Sendcast, and I'm also the managing director of B Squared. The Sendcast is here as a way to help improve knowledge around SEND. Yes, there is lots of stuff we can go and read, but we're all very busy and I do not have the time personally to do all that reading. The Sendcast is a great way to get the same consistent message to schools, external professionals and parents. In this week's episode, we're discussing on the power of language with our SEND kids. My guest this week is Ali Fanshawe. Ali is the founder of Fizzy Kids and author of the book, How to Stop Telling Your Kids to Calm Down and Why It Doesn't Work Anyway. The Sendcast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. As well as this podcast, we also have our Sendcast sessions, which is our online CPD. And if you haven't accessed the Sendcast session before, these are video CPD sessions, often with the same great guests as we have on the podcast. We run 9 live sessions and 2 free Send briefings every year. And we also record 9 other sessions. The sessions are £10 per school and you can watch live on the day or watch later on. They are yours forever. We have over 150 sessions you can purchase and use for CPD across the whole school. Or for even greater value, you can now subscribe for £175 a year and have access to all of our sessions. You can find out more on the Sendcast website. Now, let's get on with the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing the power of language with our SEND kids. My guest this week is Ali Fanshawe. Ali is the founder of Fizzy Kids and the author of the book, How to Stop Telling Your Kids to Calm Down and Why It Doesn't Work Anyway. And Ali founded Fuzzy Kids in 2018 when she became a full-time carer to her 2 adopted kids with special needs. Frustrated by the lack of practical resources on parenting her children, she set out to relearn her parenting approaches and in doing so created a new parenting language. Welcome to the show, Ali.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You are welcome. In the information you sent me some phrases parents typically use, and they're definitely the type of phrases my parents use. And they're things like, I told you to stop. Do as you're told, because I said so. Always an annoying one, that one. And the last one, don't you dare. And the last one to me was a red rag to a bull. I always dared because she told me to, if I was brave enough. But apparently that's not what she meant, and it always got worse. But she just said, don't do it, not don't you dare. But that's the thing, those phrases, what we say and what we actually mean are often different.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I love that. That is such a good example of a child being told, do not dare. And the child thinking, well, actually, I want to. I want to push those boundaries. I want to see what happens.
You haven't told me I can't. You've said only if you're brave enough.
Yeah. And I am brave enough to try that really stupid thing because I'm 9 and I just want to. Yeah, exactly. And then I guess, I think like a lot of parents, you start this whole parenting malarkey and they're these tiny little babies. And for a few years, they basically do what they're told, because they don't really have a voice to do anything else. And then suddenly they reach the stage where they do have a voice and they have opinions. And not only that, if your kids have got special needs, whatever those needs might be, they also see the world potentially differently than you do anyway. So you've got that kind of dynamic happening where a parent and a child sees the world differently anyway. And then if you've got an added element of neurodiversity going on, they might see it in a whole different way again. So it's really kind of, starting to understand and appreciate that your child, whether they're 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, is not seeing the world through the same pair of eyes that you are as their parent. And that takes a while to get your head around, right? I mean, you're a parent too, so.
And there are things when, and John, who I work with, he went on his honeymoon to Cuba. And to him, that was just like, oh my God, as growing up, I never did anything like this. This is a once in a lifetime holiday. Oh my gosh. And then he went back 4 years later with his kids. And he was saying, he's telling them this is a once in a lifetime experience, because to him, that was the most biggest thing ever. And the holiday did not go according to plan. They didn't hold it in the same admiration as he did. Because for him, he was like, at that point, 30 something. It's the second time he's had a holiday like that in his entire life. So he really understood how unique this experience it is. Was there like 4 and 1 going, it's a beach, not having any context of the importance, the money, where it is, anything. It was just another holiday. And that perspective that we somehow assume our children have, even though they're just going, car.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And when I was writing the book, when I was trying to kind of get all of these ideas down, one of the phrases and one of the things that I say in the first page of the book is, you cannot rationalize your child's emotions. So, we have to remember that we are adults, and to a degree, we have logic and rational thought going on in our brains because our brains are fully developed. Our children do not have that. They are not at that stage. They haven't developed that logical, rational thinking. And so they can't think the way that we're expecting them to think. So you start to kind of realize that what you're telling them to do or how you're telling them to do something just means nothing to them. And I think it's that realization. And I'll be frank with you, Dale, I love my children to bits, but they have got quite intense needs. So I just found myself, by the age when they were about 5 or 6, I would just be sitting at the top of the stairs having, wrestled them into their bedrooms because they were showing really big behaviors, just in the pits of despair. I had my head in my hands and I was sobbing, and I was like, what am I doing wrong? How can I not work this out? I'm an intelligent or reasonably intelligent being. I've been to university. Come on, surely this means I can figure out 2 small kids. But I couldn't, actually. I couldn't figure it out on my own. And we were quite lucky. So both my children are adopted. And we had the support of an adoption social worker. And she kind of came into my life slightly by chance. And she was just this most wonderful woman. And she started to help me understand that what I was saying to my kids and how I was saying it was unfortunately part of the problem. So the first really big step for me, and this is hard as a parent, right, is that you sometimes have to accept that what you're doing, how you're parenting your kids, is part of the problem. And she wasn't judgmental to me. She wasn't saying I was a bad person because of this. It was just a journey I had to kind of start to really acknowledge that I needed to learn to parent in a different way because it just wasn't working. It wasn't working for my kids, and it wasn't working for me. I wanted to enjoy my children. I wanted to enjoy that experience of parenthood. But there were blocks. There were blocks to that kind of connection between us and enjoyment. So parenting is an incredibly hard job. It is, as any parent will know, it is the hardest job you will ever do. But I think going on a journey, I think accepting that you might not know everything straight away and that you have to sometimes learn to be a parent. You can't necessarily accept that because how you were parented worked on you is going to work on your kids. Particularly not if they've got additional needs, or maybe, as my children also have, they've been through adverse childhood experiences. And the impact that trauma can have in early years on a child is very significant and shouldn't be underestimated.
I think there's a whole thing around, how you parent is much bigger than people realize. They think it's a small part. It's huge. There's loads of things around that, as we discussed previously on the podcast. But the other thing is, what worked for you are based on various experiences and various things. So that's why it worked for you. And your head, oh yeah, just tell them to go to sleep because that's what happens. And that's what worked for me. And you never kind of, why did it work? That sort of thing there. We make so many assumptions of why something would work. It's the way my parents parented me. And it was, you sit there and you just try and repeat the same things. And as the world has changed, and as we're just, and I'm going to actually, looking back, the things my parents did didn't work. They just appear to work at the time. That's the sort of thing. In the moment, me being smacked may have worked. But yet a week later, I was getting smacked again. And then a week later, it didn't change the behavior. It just made me stop. But also it was a dare. And it was a whole other thing. But yeah, the way we parent and what our children need from our parenting is often much bigger than people realize.
Yeah, absolutely. And, asking somebody to change their parenting style is huge. Yeah. So let's just, let's say that out loud, because there are so many parenting books out there and parenting courses and, but at the end of the day, you are asking an adult person to fundamentally change part of their being that is already very well embedded in their DNA from how they were parented. And that is not a small change to make.
And it's not about, instead of getting the bus to work, I'm now going to get a train. It's everything about this is a belief. There's a belief which has informed all of this, which you are having to change.
Yeah. And, so for anyone listening to this podcast, maybe you've been a smoker. Maybe you've given up alcohol. Maybe you've given up picking your or chewing your nails, or, whatever you might have done in your life that you've had to give up and change because it's a habit that you don't like about yourself or that isn't healthy, whatever the reason. Changing your parenting skills is very much along those lines. You've got to, it's a big, big change. It's not going to happen overnight. So I want to make people feel better here, because if you feel like your parenting isn't working with your kids right now, just accepting that is a really big first step. And then you can think about how you're going to do it. But it is a big commitment.
And that's a kind of smoking drink analogy is a really good analogy, because it is a much bigger change than you realize. You might think you don't need to. And then you think, I can do this. And then when you have made the change, when something goes wrong, it's easy to revert back. It's that kind of, for a while, it's still your natural reaction. And so when you want to do, you're like, oh, can't do that. And it's really hard. You want to go back to it because you've done it for so long. It works. And I'm air quoting that it works. So if I do that, it will be all right, but it won't. It's really hard.
You're so right. Changing your parenting style is a habit that needs changing. And if you're going to commit to changing that habit, you've got to commit to it for a while. I talk about this really early on in my book, because learning a new parenting language for me was a big commitment. And actually, like you say, I reverted to the old me lots of times. But I think there's a few things here. Firstly, if you're committed, then you've got to stay committed, just like with changing any habit. And I reckon actually after about 6 to 8 weeks of trying really hard to say things in a different way and use different phrases in different situations, the biggest change I noticed wasn't in my children and their behavior, but it was in how I felt about myself. So instead of being that person sitting with my head in my hands at the top of the stairs in despair because the house was in chaos and I didn't know how to deal with situations, I started to just have a little bit more assurance in myself. And I moved from being self-critical to being self-reflective. So what I mean by that is, instead of really having a go at myself for getting shouty at my kids again or trying the naughty step out, which I knew didn't work anyway, instead of beating myself up about that, I just was like, okay, it didn't work. I didn't do that. I didn't deal with that very well. Because of how I dealt with it, my kid got off to school, was really angry when he went into school, and that's not great for him, and that wasn't great for me. Right, how am I going to do it differently tomorrow? So instead of beating myself up, I tried to use those situations that didn't work to learn, to keep learning, and to compound the change that I was trying to make. And let's just bring it down to basics here. How you treat and talk to yourself as a parent will reflect on how you are able to parent your children. Because instead of feeling ashamed yourself and putting that shame onto your children, you will start to become more reflective of their behaviors and their words and actions too. So it is, I know it's a cliche, but it kind of starts with you. It really does. And it was so satisfying to start feeling a bit better about myself as a parent. And like I was starting to get a few things right. And I think once you get a little bit of momentum, like with any change of habit, you want to keep going, because you can see that impact. Now, what I would say is that the impact on my children, I didn't start seeing until quite a bit further down the line. And that's because I think these new habits that I was getting into took a while. Me being consistent and kind of parenting differently took a while to really compound in their minds.
Yes.
So we had to go through several rounds of me doing things differently and dealing with different situations differently in order to get to a point where they trusted in me to deal with it consistently differently. So I'll give you an example. So say I'd ask them to come to the table for dinner, always a trigger point in our house and lots of houses, I know. Yeah. I'd got to a point where I'd give them a 5-minute warning. Dinner's in 5 minutes, guys. I'd get a sand timer. We'd get the sand timer going so that they could visually see what 5 minutes meant. And then I would say, right, we're going to press pause on the TV. We're going to get to the table. We're going to start eating. And then I'll put the TV back on. We have TV dinners in our house because I find with my children and their additional needs that having a distraction while they eat actually helps them to eat better. There's a much higher chance of everyone eating their dinner and finishing it if they're a bit distracted by TV. So I don't care whether people judge me on that or not. I know that works for my family. And I think, getting that assurance and knowing your kids and being okay with some of these things is fine. Now, if that had happened in my house when I was younger, my parents would have gone crazy. Turn the TV off. How dare you have the TV on while you're eating a dinner? So it's about establishing new routines. And in the past, I might have got really shouty with my kids for not coming and sitting down at dinner when I told them it was dinner. Well, what do you mean you're not coming to sit down? I've just spent the last half an hour, slaving over a hot stove, putting fresh, food in front of you. You shall jolly well sit down when I tell you to and eat it and enjoy it. And that just hadn't worked for my children. The pressures of that, the expectations that I'd put on them to eat all their food, enjoy my food, have a conversation around what had been going on at school that day was just not accessible to my children. So it took a while of me doing things differently in order for them to trust that that was going to happen every time. But once we got into this new routine, all of a sudden, hey presto, things just started to go a little bit better at dinner time. But it took a while.
So I think there's lots of things in that. And the thing you touched on is generally it's your expectation and I've done this, so you should. Yeah. And we do these things. You're like, I've done this, you should. They have no idea what you've done at all. They have no idea. An adult would understand that you put lots of effort in, but a child doesn't. So we're putting this very adult expectation on our children and then moaning that they're not doing it. So there's loads of things like that I kind of see a lot. And also touching on, going back to you sitting at the top of the stairs, is again, you're having that adult, they should have just done this. Anyone, they're a child again. You kind of forget that. You think that I would, but also what I find is when you're in those situations, it takes up so much physical and emotional energy that you then really can't think. And then you go into your habits and you're on autopilot and you're making bad decisions. And Super Nanny, some great things. Not everyone loves it, but the bit I always remember was, and I still see it and it makes me think, is going to the supermarket. You see families where they literally shove their child in the trolley and try and get through it with their child screaming, making noise as quickly as possible. And you know that when they probably get back to that car, they sit in that car for 5-10 minutes, probably with their child still screaming, crying, or they do it when they get, but you know, it's not an enjoyable experience for anyone. They're just trying to get through it. But Super Nanny says, get them involved, get them to write their own shopping list. Even before they can write, get them to kind of make of their shopping list. Have your own shopping list, get them to read it, get them involved. Go, right, we need a cucumber. Where are the cucumbers? And off they go. And yes, your trip might take an extra 20 minutes in terms of 5-10 minutes prep time, a bit of a slower walk. But when you get to your car, you can get in your car and you're ready to go. When you get home, you're ready for the next thing. Although it's taken that bit extra time to get them on the same page as you, to get them involved in that situation, it's not asking as much from you, and it is about doing it proactively rather than reactively. So your sand timer is, right, I want them to come here. Let's get this planned in beforehand. With my teenage daughters who might be doing online gaming, and for any person who is over 40 or so, you cannot pause online games. I could never just go up for dinner. I'll be down in 10 minutes. It's like, but I've cooked dinner now. Was the issue with me? Was the issue with them? The issue is I decided when we were having dinner when it suited me, not when it suited anyone else. So I would now maybe find out, and we would talk about, well, dinner's going to be rough this time, so don't start gaming. Maybe do that after dinner. I would always actually give them a 15-minute warning, because I knew an online game takes 10 minutes. And I say, well, just don't start another one. And generally they came down before dinner. And I hadn't asked them to change at all. I just took them and their needs into consideration. Life got smoother.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I mean, to me, that says that the way you did things, they bought into that, and it felt good to them, and it felt fair. And because of that, they responded in a positive way. I think you've picked up on a really good point there, because I think what we miss so much of, and particularly with kids with additional needs who might have bigger, fizzier moments. That's why I set up Fizzy Kids, because I always say my kids are fizzy. You know, we need to accept that we have to teach emotional literacy as much as we need to teach Key Stage 1 maths and English. We cannot assume, or we cannot leave to guesswork or good luck that our children know how to express themselves emotionally. They don't. Some children do. Some children have that naturally, and they might pick up on that because they are good at listening and engaging with others, and they notice social cues, and they'll pick up on it naturally through mirroring with their own parents. But for a lot of neurodiverse kids, they don't have those same social skills built into them from day one. But it doesn't mean to say they can't learn them.
It's more explicit
It
learning.
just has to be explicit learning. So exactly. And I think, when we talk about the power of our language, and yeah, sure, there's a lot of phrases in my book I talk about where instead of saying, stop being so silly and get your shoes on, you say something like, wow, I can see you're struggling with your shoes this morning. Is there a problem, or can I help at all? So just shifting the way you speak to your kids, but effectively saying the same thing. Actually, the bigger part around a parenting language is teaching your children emotional intelligence and literacy, and helping them learn how to express themselves better. And I can see you were going to say something there. Go on.
But I think it's something you said earlier, and I think I would say we're quite arrogant at this. You were saying earlier that we are adults, we think logically. We have the ability to think logically, but often we're still thinking emotionally, or we're doing drunken purchases on eBay or something.
Speak for yourself, Dale.
You've never done that?
On Amazon, yeah, but not on eBay.
we do these silly things. We buy things emotionally, or we go do things. You stay up late because I can, but you shouldn't have. But your emotion, whatever it is. And I think when we are saying don't be silly, that is our emotion because we need to get out the door because I need to get. It's not about anyone but ourselves in those situations. But you're saying it's your kids playing up. No, it's not. They're being a child. You got up late. You haven't left enough time. You've tried to squeeze too many things into a short pace of time, and you're stressed because of that. When you're saying, don't be silly, put your shoes on, what you're really saying is, oh dear, I've got too much going on. I'm late. I've mucked up. But we put it on the child. So we are capable of intelligent decisions. But I think a lot of the time it's our emotions have come back. Yet at the same time, we're trying to teach the children to be emotionally literate, and we forget to be ourselves emotionally literate.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think so many trigger points and so many things that we say to our kids are based on clock watching, are based on an obsession with being on time, or an obsession with everything going to plan all the time because we are so busy in our lives that if it doesn't, then the rest of the day is impacted. So absolutely, it's a bit of a cliche, but we can only control ourselves, really.
Yes.
And so in controlling ourselves as adults and parents, then we are naturally helping our children just be children.
Yes.
And just giving them that space to develop and learn. And one of the tools that we've used quite effectively in our house over the years is something called a Smarty conference. And it might be that we've got there's something going on in the house that isn't quite working. And it could be a transition point, or it could be the way somebody's speaking to somebody else, or it could be, particularly in the case of my children, they're very, very good at learning inappropriate language. But whatever the reason might be, we call a Smarty conference. And the idea of a Smarty conference is you sit around a table and you tell people you're going to do this. So you make it very explicit and clear. We need a Smarty conference on whatever it might be. Keep it specific. Don't make it too broad. And everyone sits around the table. We agree what the problem is. And then we come up with ideas and things that we can do differently as a family to help solve this problem. And for every idea that people come up with, whether they're good or bad, people take a Smartie from the pot in the middle. Oh, it can be a Skittle or, whatever it might be. But what I found that did over the years was it encouraged the children to think through problems. So instead of me telling them what needed to happen differently, really I gave them the chance to think through what either they needed to do differently, or give them the chance to say what I needed to do differently to support them. And no ideas were off the table. And once we we did this when they were quite little, maybe 6, 7. So they were 5 minutes long, these Smarty conferences. You don't have to eke it out for hours. Keep it short, keep it sweet.
No agenda, no minute making.
No, exactly. And we'd maybe pick 1 or 2 ideas that people had come up with, and we'd say, right, we're going to give these a go for a week. And we'd put it up on a board somewhere on a whiteboard, or I'd put it a reminder on my phone each day, and we'd just give it a go. And invariably what I found was that even in just having that conversation for 5 minutes, things got better, because we'd just got it out in the open. We'd acknowledged as a family that it was a problem and that we needed to do something differently. And that in itself was a really important therapeutic, emotional kind of time that we spent together as a family. And to this day, my kids know that if I say, do you know what, I think we need a bit of a chat in the living room before we go out today or put the TV on, they will know that there's something going on that we need to work through, and that it's a very natural consequence. It's not I'm not forcing a punishment on them, but I am saying it's important enough. There's something going on that's not right, that I'm going to take the time out to talk about this with you, and you're going to have to invest in that time too. And I think for me, especially as the children get older, my kids are now 11 and 13, that familiarity with talking through things from a very young age has been a really powerful tool. And we don't always solve everything straight away. And they don't necessarily like having to talk through things all the time. I'm not saying we're some kind of, perfect family that gets it right all the time. But they know that talking through things is the way we live our family life. And, they've known that from very young.
So loads of questions about this. And the first one, again, you were talking earlier about when you changed your behavior, you felt that impact on you, but it kind of took longer with the children to see the impact. I wonder with the Smarty conference, it was the same sort of thing. Straight away, you immediately felt, well, I've dealt with this in a different way. I feel so much better. And the children were maybe there going, okay, I've got to talk and I get a Smarty, to over time realizing what the Smarty conference is about and actually understanding and being involved more. It's that sort of thing. It is. And again, I think with a lot of parenting, we see the impact on us, and the kids they do take time to trust us. Is this a new thing? We're going to go back to the old way, or, okay, yeah, I'll invest in this. So I think that takes time and you get that reward later. My next question is, have your children ever asked for a Smarty conference?
No, they've asked for Smarties though. Yeah.
But that's going to be an interesting thing. It's kind of as they get older, that's when the Smarty conference works, because maybe they don't like something you're doing. They're going, it's time to have a Smarty conference with mum.
Yeah. No, they don't ask for a Smarty conference, but just the other day, my youngest son said to me, Mum, I need to talk to you about something. Can we pop into the living room? So it might not be overt, but I think they trust that they can talk to me, that they can say things to me, that I'll take them seriously, that I won't dismiss it or laugh them off. So I think it has built that trust and that confidence. And, you use that word, trust. You kind of just used it in your sentence, but trust, having children who trust in their parents is huge. It's huge. And you're right, it takes time to build up that trust, particularly for any of your listeners out there who may be fostering or have adopted kids. That trust is not inbuilt, let me tell you. However hard you try as a parent, that does not always come naturally, and it can take years and years for your children to really trust you, often with very good reason because of their early childhood experiences with adults. But building that trust is so key, and you can build that trust in the smallest of ways each day. So, one phrase that I loved over the years, there's a phrase and an action that goes with it. If your child's rude to you, say they swear at you because you've suggested something like tidying their rooms or, putting their toys away, and they get angry and sweary, it is so easy to react and go, how dare you talk to me like that? Who do you think you are using that kind of language in my house? That's despicable. That's awful. And you can, of course, you can say whatever. You could swear back at them if you wanted to. But if you just stop for a second and either completely ignore the language, and by that, what I mean is you could say something like, wow, those are really strong words. What's going on? Is there something else going on? Or you could say something like, I'm finding it hard, you using those words with me. So I'm just going to go into the utility and fold the washing. I'm there for you if you need me. Just come find me. Or saying something like, more explicit, we don't use those words in our house. I didn't like what you just said to me there. Let's try and find a better way for you to tell me how you're feeling right now. There are a lot of different variations, but what you've done in that moment is A, you've remained calm. B, you have not added any fuel to the situation. So the likelihood is it will fizzle out quite quickly rather than your child escalating because you've escalated. And C, the walking away, but telling them you're still there. You've put a bit of distance between yourself and them. So you can go and swear under your breath about your child in another room, but they won't hear you. but you've also taught them a really good skill. So if they're in a situation where someone's being rude to them or mean to them, you've given them a skill, walking away. You can walk away from situations. You don't have to stand there and react straight away. So there's so many, all of those things have built a trust. Your child has started to trust in you to deal with the situation in a very different way than you maybe did before.
That's interesting, is when something happens in our lives, we have options to call on. We might not choose the best one. We will choose one of them, but we have options. Whereas in that situation, the child's frustrated, they're lashing out. How you respond is teaching them. You walking away is an option. You just saying, how dare you? Who do you think you are? Which is a phrase my mum used. And I probably, as I got into my teenage years, I would have said something even ruder back about I'm your son. And what you've then taught them is you've not dealt with it either. So what you're saying is when someone's mad at you, you get mad back. You're not in control. You're not emotionally lit. So it's those sorts of things are really powerful. And that trust is a really interesting thing, because people would say, oh, back when I was young, I would always do as my parents told me, or I think back then, I think we had blind trust and blind obedience. We just trusted because we knew our parents knew best. And then at some point you realize they don't. And the same with obedience. At some point you realize, oh, hang on, I've got a choice. There is a punishment, but I've got a choice. And I can do it. I can get punished. But if it's worth it, isn't it? Like staying out late or whatever. You'll do those things. Whereas I think now my children obey is a strong word, but they follow the rules. They partake in society, whatever is the correct term, but they know what is expected of them because we've developed it together, and that it's been built up, not because I said so, because I'm showing you, I'm modeling, I'm teaching you. So that trust and that obedience has been earned rather than expected. And at some point with my parents, I said, you suddenly realize, whoa, okay. Well, I'm hoping that because I've shown that I make mistakes, I get things wrong, I get stressed, I do shout at them, but then I apologize. I'm hopefully showing that I am human and I'm doing my best I can for them. And that's all we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what you're really touching on there is a point that fascinates me. So there's, I'm not a parenting expert. I never say that I am. I just say that I've learned how to parent my children differently. And if that happens to work for others too, then that's great. But what we never lost was boundaries. But I think what you're really saying there is that boundaries can be quite fluid, but they can also be very unique for each family. But whatever happens, you've got to have them, because without boundaries, children don't feel safe. So children need to know what's right and wrong. Children need to know that they are safe and that their parents are holding their boundaries, whether that be in the language that's used in the house or the expectations around doing homework or whatever those boundaries might be. They do need to be held, but they can be held respectfully. I think that's the key thing. It's just, and that respect, building that respect, like you were talking about with your daughters, they now respect those boundaries because of the way that you've held them. So I think like you say, when we were growing up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whenever it might have been, there was a thought that boundaries could only be held and rules could only be kept by being really shouty and strict and inflicting punishment for even the tiniest kind of, foot out of that line. Well, I think what we're learning now with kids is that they don't necessarily need that in order to still hold that boundary. So the boundary can be held respectfully by a parent, but there still needs to be boundaries. Our children need that as they're growing up. That is critical. And I think, there's a lot of talk about gentle parenting. I think maybe it works to a certain degree, but only if you have boundaries. And I think that for me is, again, why I kept coming back to the way I was talking to my kids and how I was talking to them and what I was saying. Because I found that just in shifting my language and my approach and my thinking was enough to hold those boundaries. And, and things got really bad in our house. I'm not going to dress it up. My children had very, very kind of big, challenging behaviors, partly because of their trauma and partly because of their special needs. And they were tough, tough days. And I'm sure, Senkos or other parents listening, you have kids with additional needs will get that. And it's very hard. It's very hard to see those big, challenging behaviors coming out when all you want to do is love your child. But you have to start seeing the behaviors separately from the love that you hold for your child. And learning a new language and a new way to talk to your kids is really about learning a language that talks to those behaviors in those moments and that engages with their brains. And I think, there is nothing to lose by trying to parent differently. If you are at a point like me, like I was, where you're sitting at the top of your stairs with your head in your hands, you've got nothing to lose. Don't be afraid to just try new stuff and see what happens.
But we know in lots of podcasts and lots of things you'll hear where if you want to know, ask them. Yeah. If you want to know what supports them best, ask them. But yet at the same time, we seem to think that we have to be the ones who come up with the boundaries and they have to follow them. And sometimes, as you said, boundaries are flexible. So where you think a boundary should be here, if they've got a really good reason of why it should not be there, move it. Why not? And I don't know why, but again, it might have just because it was before I did the pod, I don't know why, but something about my children, I think when they started getting to secondary school, I just saw my house as 4 adults. Not that we could all do what we wanted, but rather than dinners at 7, yeah, if you were going out with 3 friends, would you say we're eating at 7, or would you say when shall we eat? And someone might go 7. Everyone happy with 7? Cool. The outcome is exactly the same, but we've completely changed how we got there. One is a dictatorship, and one is when are we? And I just found that when we did things at weekends, rather than telling them, so, oh, we were thinking of doing this. What do you think? Yeah, love it. And some things I thought they would love, they didn't want to do. And I think treating it as 4 adults worked really well. And sometimes they didn't want, this is the thing, sometimes they didn't want a boundary. And that's when you might go to the, because I said so, or because it's the way it is. It's always been that way since Father Time, Stonehenge, everything. We've always had this boundary. Or you explain to them why the boundary is there. And I've been really honest to my daughters. I said, the rules we have in this house are made up. They are completely made up. They can change, but we've got to follow rules because that's what you've got to do in society. When you break a rule here, there might be a consequence, but generally the consequence will probably be worse almost like what you've done. The natural consequence will be worse for you. So staying up too late, you're going to have a really bad day next day. I don't need to punish you any more than that. But helping them see that the rules are there for reasons, and then when you find out the reason, you'll understand it, that you kind of then learn that most rules are there for a reason, and you learn to follow them. So when they leave my house, they're going to follow rules because they've learned, not because someone says so, but they're generally there for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can start to have those honest conversations with your children as they get older as well. One of my phrases that I quite enjoy using, slightly weirdly, but my 2 boys are very into kind of gaming. They love that. And quite often they'll say something like, oh, but so-and-so, this friend of mine's playing this new game online and I want to play it. And I'll say no, and I'll give my reasons. And there might be a bit of kickback. And I will say something like, I'm okay with you not liking me doing this because I am your parent and my job is to keep you safe. And I would rather you not like me and you be safe than you like my decision right now and you not be safe. And I will say that to them. And that is me holding a boundary. And that is me being very clear with them. But I think it's, it is important that children hear no sometimes. Yes. They have to hear no. And actually, for a lot of neurodiverse kids, having clear boundaries and clear rules is not restrictive to them. It's the opposite. They see it as freedom because if they know the rules, they can follow the rules and the rules feel safe and the rules give them a clear view of what they can do and can't do. So, for example, in our house, we do let our kids watch YouTube, not very often, but YouTube is for a Tuesday afternoon and a Friday afternoon. And it doesn't matter where we are in the world. On a Tuesday, my children will ask to watch YouTube. And I forget that we might be on holiday and I've forgotten it's a Tuesday. Oh, they have not. Mum, it's Tuesday. It's Tuesday at 5:00. Can we watch YouTube? But I love that. I love that they know it so well and it feels so safe that wherever they are and whatever they're doing, Tuesday is watching YouTube day. And that's a really positive thing in my mind.
But I bet you if I asked them why only can you watch it then, they would probably give a reason, not that's what Mum says. They'll probably give you a reason so we can do other things. Not just, and that's the thing. It's not just saying no because, it's no and a reason. And once they then have that no and a reason, the rule is respected and followed, which also means they're not asking for it on a Wednesday. They're not. Why am I not allowed to play that game? Look, I know he's playing it, but it's an 18 game. There are lots of things in there. It's blah, blah, blah. It's just not going to be great. You'll get really stressed. You remember that time you did that? Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to avoid that. Okay. Next new game comes out. Oh, I won't ask. It's sort of, it helps them not ask the questions because they've already understood the rules, so they're not asked the question.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And actually what I'm finding with my children is that having been through these really kind of challenging behaviors and big moments, which still happen, but much less frequently, what the point we're at now is that we can have quite honest conversations. And actually, sometimes I do revert to more traditional parenting chat and it works. And the reason it's starting to work probably is because they trust me. So occasionally if I do say something, which I don't intend to, but sometimes things just pop out because none of us are perfect. If I do say something like, oh, just hurry up and get your shoes on, got to leave the house, we were late for football again. Instead of it leading to a massive kickoff, I just get a bit of a grumble. Oh, God, what's going on at me, Mum? And it's almost like we had to go through this period of kind of where I was incredibly understanding every second and building that trust and building that belief that I was going to deal with things in the same consistent way to now actually where they are more emotionally stable and more emotionally mature as they get older, and they're able to respond to me being annoying, slightly shouty mum sometimes.
But that's the thing is, again, they're at such an emotionally literate level that when you're saying that, they're looking at you going, Mum's having a bad day. She's in a rush. Normally she's really understanding. So rather than moaning, she's obviously having a bad day. I'll just get my shoes on. And it's a real, actually huge level. Like my children have done the same sort of thing. You're in a rush and they just look at you and just get on with it. And my daughters grumble to each other and then one of them will share. But it's nice because they know that when they share it with me, I go and talk to the other one and go, I'm sorry I did that. But it's that sort of thing that they get that when I do it, it's because I'm not in a great place. And they know that normally I wouldn't, so there must be a reason. And they've also learned it's obviously not them. And so it really shows that emotional literacy level of them to pick up that that's not her normal behavior or my normal behavior. Okay, I best do this. It's amazing that we think they're not that emotionally literate, but in that moment, you weren't emotionally literate because you're just blur. You're kind of in the emotion zone, not the logic zone. But they're in the logic zone going, yeah, just do as I'm told to do.
Yeah. Mum's being emotional. Let's just park it. Move on.
Don't ever say those phrases. Mum's being emotional. That's evil. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And when you start to hear your children use phrases that you use, that is just so heartwarming. If my two are bickering now, and they really do bicker, like a lot of siblings do, occasionally one of them will come up with something like, "You must be feeling really bad to say something so awful to me right now." And I'm like, "Oh my God, that's hilarious." I would have just basically thumped my brother in the stomach at that point. But they do pick up. Your language has so much power. Never underestimate the power of what you say and how you say it to your kids. These, as we said at the start, Dale, these kids, particularly neurodiverse kids, they have spidey senses. They pick up on everything. So you can be certain that if you are feeling brave enough to give a different kind of parenting a go, that eventually your children will cotton on, and they will thank you for it.
I remember my daughter was probably about 6 or 7, and me as a dad probably shouldn't have laughed at all, let alone so hard. It was about shoes. It was about putting shoes on, and one daughter was in the car and I was outside, and one daughter was being slow with her shoes for whatever reason, and my wife was getting grumpy. And I think my daughter just snapped back. And so my wife says the phrase, "Don't you raise your voice at me." To which my 7-year-old daughter looked at her square in the eyes and went, "Don't you raise your voice with me." And she mirrored her. And it was the funniest thing I've ever seen. Because it was just completely useless style of parenting. It was just my daughter just worked out the logic, worked out what's going to happen. And and that style of parenting is not helpful. And I do remember when my parents would raise their voice, then the next step was smacking. The next step was going to your room for the evening. And that was gold tier parenting. You cannot escalate it past going to your room for the evening. There was nothing else. And we'd repeat the same mistakes. I don't know if did you do the same behavior again and again and always get sent to your room? You didn't learn why. You didn't learn another version. You didn't learn I had an option. I could have done something different, or why it is so bad. That was never explained. It's because I said so. So when we think about those things as our childhood, I quickly realized that's not how you parent. It's quite easy when you're tired to fall into the raising your voice, but it's not helpful. In the moment, it might get rid of them, but it's not helping them.
No, exactly. And all those kind of old phrases, oh, having the last word and things like that, it's like, well, that where I've got to with that is that I agree. I am the adult, actually, and I want to have the last word. But what I know with my children is that I can have the last word 24 hours later, or 48 hours later, or to be quite frank, a week later. But actually, in that time, everyone's regulated, calm themselves. And then I do have the last word, because we'll go and sit in the living room and have a chat about whatever it was that had kicked off a day ago, 2 days ago, a week ago. And I have the last word. And it's so much more powerful to have the last word when your child can listen, because they're not in fight, flight, or freeze mode. So by all means, parents, have the last word, but choose your time when you want to have it. Don't have the last word in the moment or in the argument.
Because
that's not going to make any difference.
Because having the last word is a power thing. And especially when they're trying to be adults, you're being a child by wanting the last word. And they're trying to be an adult, but thinking by having, it's just a fight. And it's not about even anything. It just becomes who has the power. Let them think they have the power. It's going to bite them in the butt later, but let them. What you want that situation to stop as quickly as possible.
Nobody can learn when they're dysregulated. No one can learn when they're in survival mode. And if you have got the kind of kids who go into survival mode quite easily, into that fight or flight or freeze, whatever it might be, then you've really got to pick your time when you're teaching your lessons. I'm doing the inverted comma things now. But when and the best way to teach your child a lesson, and I mean that in a positive way, is when they're regulated and calm. So your role in the middle of an argument or when everything's going fizzy and everything's kicking off in the house, you have a very simple role in that moment, and that is to re-regulate everybody. Because as soon as you can do that, that's when they start to learn again, when they're out of their fight, flight, freeze, survival mode and back into thinking mode. And the more you practice this different language, the more likely you are to stay in your thinking brain mode rather than you go into survival mode. Because that's all that's happening when you're getting shouty and angry. You're matching them. You're going into the same mode as your child.
Yes, you've lost logic. You're now in emotion, and what's coming out of your mouth is not what you wanted. It's
Exactly.
just on auto. It's the anger going for it inside out. And it's not helpful for anyone. And there is a thing where I know I'm controlling it, or it's a show. And I've done that voice, I've done that show. And either I haven't actually been in control, or I felt bad for doing it afterwards. There are very few times where, and it's the safety bits, like crossing the road where you'll grab your child and you'll say, stop. But you'll only have to do that a couple of times. And I've hit the age in my life where my daughter's at university, and we went down to see her, and we're crossing a road, and I'm looking at something on my phone because she asked me a question. I'm finding the answer, but I'm looking up and I'm paying attention. As we got to the road, I'm about to stop, and my 18-year-old daughter just put her hand to stop me. And in that moment, I could have got really insulted that she thinks I need to be told to stop. Yeah. In the moment, I just went, what is she doing? I can see. And he felt it come up, and I just went, that's not what she's doing. She's looking after me. It's not, I know better than you. It was just, I just went, wow. It was a huge, that initial reaction. I paused. And then the next reaction which came through was, oh.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's lovely. I mean, I know we've probably got to wrap up soon, but just a final thought that I've got a friend who's in the army, and if you join the British Army, they teach you 3 levels of engagement, and it's quite unique. So in a lot of other armies in the world, apparently, you go straight to holding a rifle or a gun in someone's face in a difficult situation. But the British Army teach it differently. Level 1 is words. So you might have your gun hanging over your shoulder, but your primary aim is to engage through words, through verbal communication. Level 2 might be that you've kind of think, there's maybe a bit more of a threat here. So as well as talking and trying to communicate verbally, you've got one hand on your gun. Okay, so it's kind of getting ready, getting ready just in case. But you still haven't done anything. There's no threat. There's nothing. It's only when you get to level 3 that the gun points towards the threat, whether it's a person or an animal or whatever it might be. So that is a very clear kind of starting point. The starting point is to talk. So I always say to parents, when you're going into an argument with your kids, what's your aim? Is your aim, if they're at level 3 already, if they're pointing a gun at you ready to fire and engage, are you going to join them in that? Is your aim to join your child in a fight? If it is, then level 3 is great. Go in there, all guns blazing. Good luck to you. Let's see who wins.
It might not be you, or everyone loses.
Exactly. Yeah. Or actually, can you go in at level 1? Whoa, golly, you look really upset. What's going on? Come on, talk to me. I'm your mum. I'm here for you. There's your level 1. And I think I always feel like if the British Army can learn to think in those ways, then surely us as parents can learn to think in those ways too. And I really love the analogy. And I think it is always worth us questioning, where can I start? How low can I start actually, with this conversation? How can I prevent it escalating any further?
I also like to think in that situation is, of course, they're at level 3. So Ali, what would cause you to get to level 3? Think about what would cause you. In general, you're hitting big things in your head. You don't have to say anything, but you're thinking, you come up with a list of things. Yeah. And generally it's around breaking trust and various other things. And they would get you to 3. What do you want when you're at 3? You want a hug. You want understanding. You want support. So going in when someone's at 3, if you were at 3, what do you want? Whether they're right, whether they're wrong, when someone's at 3, I'm pretty sure that most wars, everyone fights on religion, believing God's on their side. So who's right, who's wrong, doesn't really matter in that moment. It's let's get down from 3. Yeah. Sometimes, especially in films, when someone gets to 3 in a film, it's always a misunderstanding. But off they go, and then it all goes wrong because they're at 3. And they didn't have enough information. It's actually, if you watch any film, especially a rom-com, within 5 minutes, the whole film could have been wrapped up with one extra word or a signal not dropping it. Whatever it is, the whole film could have been wrapped up in 5 minutes. But no, someone went to 3, and then we have an hour and a half
of unwrapping the 3.
Yes. So when next time you watch a rom-com, work out how can I wrap this film up in 5 minutes? What information needed to be said? Either what question needed to be asked because you've misunderstood, but you're now going on that assumption, or what? Just think about that and and all that stuff can be avoided. We can do the same in our lives. And I do like that 1 to 3 analogy. It's quite a good one. I'm not going to mention the US police or anything.
No, let's not talk about that. Yeah. Let's stick with the British Army.
We'll stick with the British Army. We like them. So, and thank you for doing a final thought. I didn't have to find a way to wrap it up. You've done a final thought. So I don't have to ask you for your final thought. You've given it to me, and it was a great one. So thank you for coming on the show. Really enjoyed it. And as always, for my guests, I'll be sharing Ali's contact details and also a link to her book, and she's brought me a copy in. I'm not sure she signed it, but I'll find out in a minute. And you'll find the show notes, as always, wherever you listen to the podcast or on the Sendcast website. Please follow us on the social medias. On Twitter, we are at The Sendcast. On Facebook, The Sendcast. On Instagram, The Sendcast. And on TikTok, The Sendcast. We're also looking at Blue Sky, but I'm still not sure on that one. And if you listen to us through iTunes or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else where you can leave a review, please leave us a review and let others know what you think. And before I go, I would just like to remind you to check out Sendcast Sessions with over 150 great video CPD sessions that you can access when you want. And if you haven't accessed Sendcast Sessions, it's just video CPD with some of the same guests as on the podcast. We run live 9 sessions and 2 free send briefings every year. And the paid sessions are £10 each, but you get to watch them live on the day, or you can watch them later on. They are yours forever. And it's a really great way to get CPD to all your staff around SEND. So thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Sendcast. It is goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Bye, everyone.